welcome everybody. My name's JC Calderon. I'm representing the Board of Governors of the Yale Alumni Association here tonight, having our Thursday night show, Yale Then and Now. And this week's show is a special look at the Dems, the oldest club, the largest club on the campus today. And this is a part of the Career Life in Yale's committee of the Board of Governors. We welcome everyone here participating. Tonight's moderator will be class of 2025, Roxana Grunewald, who is a member of the Dems Club. And Roxana, if you could take it away and just introduce our four panelists as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, JC. Thank you. And hello, everyone, and to everybody watching this on the recording. Thanks for being here. Quick introduction of myself. I am Roxana Grunewald, Yale College class of 2025 student. I'm a member of STAY, Students and Alumni at Yale, and the alumni at the YAA, and on the Careers Life in Yale board. And I have organized this panel, which is focusing on the Yale College Democrats, but it is the first in a series spotlighting political activism on Yale's campus, which is very exciting. And this show will have current and past board members and a Dems alum speaking on political engagement as a student, both then and now. And quickly, we do want to disclaim that this show will be as nonpartisan as possible, and that neither the Yale College Democrats or the YAA or STAY are endorsing the opinions discussed here. And this discussion will mostly be centered on the campus political institutions and how these clubs can integrate with New Haven and with politics on the local campus and state and national levels. And yes, a brief history of Dems is that it is distinct from YPU, Yale Political Union, which is a debate society. And the Dems was founded in 1980 to advocate for progressive social and political change. And yeah, with that, let's introduce our four panelists, which we are so glad to have today. And just give a brief introduction, including your pronouns, class year, your major, your role in Dems, and briefly your political interests, starting with Emma Wallner.
Thanks, Roxana. I'm so happy to be here tonight. Thank you all for coming. My name is Emma. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. I'm a global affairs major. Within Dems, I'm currently serving as the vice president. Last year, I was the treasurer, and prior to that, I did elections work within our elections branch. And a particular policy area I care about would be education policy, access to higher education, and things dealing with that. Who is next, Roxana?
Yes, thank you, Alvaro.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alvaro. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a junior in Brantford. And last semester, I had the privilege of being elections coordinator in the Yale College Democrats. And before that, I have also done legend, the Yale College Democrats, city, and voter engagement. And an issue I'm probably passionate about is voting rights. That's something a particular passion of mine.
Thank you so much. Alana?
Amazing. Hello, everyone. My name is Alana Irvin. I use she, her pronouns. I double major in music and political science at Yale. And this past year, I served as the city engagement coordinator for the Yale College Democrats, and previously had been a fellow in the city engagement branch for a couple of semesters. And a particular area of policy that I'm interested in is just local government, especially city governments, and how they function and make policy.
Thank you. And lastly, Sergio.
Hi, I'm Sergio Lopez. Bring up the alumni perspective a bit, recent alumni with class of 17. And apart from, I was ledge captain in the Yale Dems during my time at Yale. Since then, I ran and was elected in 2020 to city council in my hometown of Campbell, California, out here in the Bay Area. And I was very proud during that campaign, 1.5, almost 2-year campaign, to have a number of Yale Dems who supported and played a really integral part, made a big difference for our race and locally. So very glad to be with you all here. And I'll just say, in particular, ran on housing, supporting our small businesses, and improving our public transit.
Yes, thank you so much. And if the audience members would like to turn on their cameras, I know it can be very scary, but we would love to have this feel like more of a discussion. And if you have any questions, feel free to place them in the chat, and then you can ask them yourself. And thank you. Yeah, so briefly, Emma, if you could please give us an introduction to the structure of Dems as an organization and its branches.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. So Yale Dems, like was said earlier, is the largest action-oriented political group on campus apart from the YPU. We function differently in that we have 4 operating branches that work in different sectors of politics. Elections, which Alvaro can definitely speak to in depth, city engagement, which Alana can talk about, voter engagement, which is focused on voting specifically on Yale's campus and access to voting, as well as our legislative branch, which operates out of Hartford, particularly right now as the CGA, the Connecticut General Assembly, is in session. And I'm happy to talk about all of those things if you would like me to, Roxana.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much. And we will dive into those branches individually in our questions. And the questions that I'll be asking will focus on 2 main areas. The first being Dems as an organization, and then the second as Dems as a community and the social aspect of Dems that hopefully lives on well beyond graduation. So yeah, the first question I will pose to all of you, and that's why you joined Dems. Was it the Dems community, the political activism, the ability to work on campaigns, or the integration with New Haven that was the major draw? And let's start with Sergio.
Sure. For me, it was a little bit of all of the above of the things that you named. I actually started out what was much more involved my first year in the YPU actually, and no criticism to those who enjoy their time, but I think I was looking for something a little bit more grounded in pragmatic action, and Dems definitely, as you just named, gives you a lot of opportunities to do that, and I think during my time was really kind of in the process of starting to think about how to have a stronger and healthier integration with the New Haven community. In particular, the Ledge Captain program started really getting underway. So there are a lot of exciting changes. Was really glad to be a part of it. And clearly that has continued.
Thank you so much. Emma?
Yeah, I think I joined Dems and stayed in Dems for different reasons. I think I joined Dems, obviously I came up as many of my peers did during the Trump administration through high school, got very interested in politics, particularly in elections. So joined the fall of my first year, hoping to work on some 2019 races and then eventually the midterms the following year. But I think I stayed purely because of the people. I formed very, very close relationships with so many people, several of whom are here, and with upperclassmen who were just like vital to my Yale experience in general and were amazing mentors to me.
Perfect. Thank you. Alvaro?
I'd probably echo something similar to Emma. I joined Dems because there was a lot of different political opportunities that I hadn't had growing up. You can work in the legislative, in Connecticut legislator, you can work in electoral campaigns, you can work in the state of New Haven, you can work in voter engagement, all of which, there's a value to each and every single one of them. But you really do get to have a strong sense of community in the Yale College Democrats, and that's something that I had always prided and continued to cherish in my time in the Yale College Democrats.
Thank you. And then Alana.
Yeah, so when I arrived at Yale, I was really excited to explore campaigns in a way that I didn't really have the opportunity and knowledge to do in high school. My public high school didn't have a political club of any kind, and I volunteered a little bit, but I really did not know what I was doing. So when I got to college, I knew I was really interested in politics. I knew this was something that mattered a lot to me, but I wanted a place to explore that and have more opportunities to do so. I also was arriving in a new place in New Haven, and having like a sense of place and community means a lot to me. And I immediately felt like this city is so different from my very small town where I grew up. And so, full of life and opportunities, and I wanted to explore that. And the city engagement branch of the Yale College Democrats was really a place where I was able to do that and feel so lucky to have the opportunities to learn about the city, and ended up really just like falling in love with New Haven politics and organizing and community engagement and advocacy. So I think that's why I ended up staying in Dems.
Yes, thank you, thank you. I hear a lot of similarities, and that's wonderful. We'll definitely talk about the community aspect, but first, let's talk about how students are involved in Dems and what does it mean to be a Dems member for Dems at large? What about being a fellow or being a board member? What are the distinctions between the work and the planning? Let's start with Emma.
Yeah, lots to unpack here. So I mentioned the 4 branches. Out of those branches, we run what we call a fellowship program, which is essentially kind of like pseudo internships that our first years, sophomores, and juniors join. And they work sort of with partner organizations in New Haven. They can work on campaigns. And then in the legislature, they also work on specific bills, which is what we're really focusing on right now. In voter engagement, they kind of all handle sort of separate tasks working together with the Yale administration. But in general, we kind of run these pseudo internships for our students starting at the beginning of every semester. They sort of apply, but we take everyone to be matched to one of these opportunities. And then their coordinators, both Alvaro and Alana were coordinators, sort of guide them through that process throughout the semester. You are allowed and absolutely welcome to be a member of the Yale Dems if you are not participating in a fellowship. You can come to our general body meetings, which are held on Tuesdays, and participate in any of our events, which include speakers, community conversations, where we sort of sit down and talk about like more policy oriented things, and also our social events. So I hope that, and then our board, of course, is, you know, all of those coordinators, the people who run those individual like social gatherings, as well as those community conversations, which I talked about. And then the vice president and the president. Does that answer your question, Roxana?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you. You touched upon everything. Perfect. So diving into the branches a little bit more in depth, we know that elections and legislation are the 2 most popular branches, or the most that seem to attract the most students. But first, let's talk about city engagement, because most of Yale students are not from New Haven, not from Connecticut, and maybe not even from the East Coast. And how can the students in Dems learn more about New Haven and of New Haven's local residents through Dems and through the city engagement branch? Alana?
Yeah, so personally, I think that students have a responsibility to, at the very least, learn about, respect, and support folks living in the city that we occupy. And so what's wonderful about Dems, and also just about the city at large, is that you know, there's so many ways to get involved in the city. Whatever your interests are politically, or even if you're just kind of looking to engage, there are so many ways to do so. You know, for me, when I got to Yale, I started off my time really trying to commit to doing a lot of volunteering off campus with organizations like Downtown Evening Soup Kitchen, Sunrise Cafe, Mutual Aid Collective, schools. And after spending a lot of time kind of doing that kind of work, Dems kind of helped me realize that there are so many great parts of the city outside of social services and outside of volunteering in that capacity. And so, you know, I've spent a lot of time in city, and fellows in city have spent a lot of time kind of enjoying the beauty of New Haven and all that you can learn from it. You know, historically, all that you can learn in terms of kind of the arts in New Haven, in terms of community events, protests. I personally I double major in music, and I'm a musician, and you know, I've had incredible experiences meeting musicians in New Haven. We had Tabisa, who's a local activist and musician, come in and speak to the group during one of our meetings. I've loved attending community events, making friends in the city, just walking around and exploring different neighborhoods, going to protests, canvassing and phone banking locally, even if it's not a race where there's it's a swing district where there's a Republican and a Democrat running against each other. There are still opportunities to engage politically and, you know, ask people how they feel about policies across the spectrum of the left, since we're in a very blue area here. So I think that City provides a lot of opportunity to do all of those things. As a fellow, you can work directly with an organization or city government and learn more in that sense. But also at the beginning of every city engagement meeting, we listen to like a song from a local artist. We talk about, their background. We talk about politics in the city. We talk about the Board of Ed in the city. We talk about arts and culture in the city. And so there's so much to do, I think. And so I felt really privileged to have the opportunity to explore that.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's wonderful. And will you tell us a little bit about how those who are not involved in City can still learn about New Haven through City, maybe through the Elm City updates given at the Dems meetings?
Yeah, absolutely. So City Fellows present on the local news every week. So that's, I think, one thing that a lot of folks who are like interested in politics do a lot of reading the news. And personally, I think that reading national, international news can be really overwhelming. And so we kind of bring some of the things that are closer to home into Dems meetings by giving, presentations on the news, what's going on, whether there's a new local business to visit, whether there's kind of something politically happening, whatever it is, we present that. We also have speakers come in to talk with Dems and tell us about their experiences. We had 12 community activists come into the city last year or from the city to speak to Dems. We had a teach-in with New Haven Rising and the unions in New Haven. We've had the mayor come in this past semester. We had the mayor come in and speak with us directly and talk about his experiences. So there's a lot of there are a lot of ways that if you're not a city engagement fellow, you can get information on the city and just learn more as well, which I think is incredibly important.
Thank you so much. Turning to the legislation branch, Emma, will you please give us a little overview of the Connecticut General Assembly, CGA, and then we'll discuss kind of how students can interact with the legislation and shuffle that through the process.
Yeah. So right now, actually, we are very actively engaged with the CGA because they are in session. We sort of coordinate their own timeline with ours. So for example, tomorrow they'll hear a couple bills that we're working on. So at this Tuesday's meeting, we worked on testimony for the bills that are presented tomorrow. And we'll have our own Ledge Fellows actually testifying on behalf of those bills. This like cyclically repeats throughout the entire semester until the end of the CGA session, which will be in May. And we work on a variety of different bills. This week, it's climate justice and various education policy issues. We had, because the CGA actually started early this year for like different COVID reasons, we had a couple of fellows testify even before our first Dems meeting, which was awesome of them. And they are older students, of course, who have had some more experience. But yeah, that is what we're working on right now.
Perfect, thank you. And then what have been some wins or some of the most recently passed bills from the CGA that Ledge Fellows have worked on? Emma.
Yeah, we passed 9 bills last year, which is a record number of bills on behalf of Dems. Kyle's actually on this call, who was our Ledge coordinator in the prior year, who can probably speak to the specifics more candidly. But I do know several policies pertaining to like socioeconomic issues were passed that we had worked on, and we're continuing. There's a bunch that had actually dropped last year that we are taking up again, particularly Ban the Box, which deals with college admissions. We'll be working on again, was testified upon last week by one of our members, and that's just another repeat from last year. So still trying to get some of the same bills passed, but also working on new ones.
Perfect, thank you. And Kyle, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but if you so desire, you definitely can jump in and just tell us a little bit more and have this feel more like a conversation.
As Emma alluded to previously, Dems had a really wonderful session at the CGA up in Hartford last year. We ended up being instrumental in passing 9 different bills that included landmark achievements like ending prison gerrymandering in Connecticut, which is a sort of once in a decade attempt, just because maps are redrawn, as I'm sure we all know, once every 10 years. So if there was a year to do it, it was 2021. We also made phone calls from prison, including telecalls, free. Connecticut, actually second only to Arkansas, my home state, price gouged prisoners to the tune of $2.15 per minute. And as you can imagine, someone who's incarcerated doesn't have spare change laying around, much less change to spend on talking to their children who are behind bars. But looking forward to this session, Democrats in the House and Senate have prioritized clean air in Connecticut. So looking forward to improving incentives to getting electric vehicles on the road in the state. We are also really, really attentive to student mental health, particularly in the age of COVID and in COVID endemicity. I don't know what kind of adjective that is, but trying to bankroll some scientific language in here. But I think we've all probably been kept abreast of a real urgency on the part of Democratic governors also to respond to COVID restrictions in schools, perhaps prematurely, but in any event, I think trying to ameliorate some of the mental harm that certainly school-age children, I mean, no less college students have had to kind of deal with and adapt to in silence in the past 3 years. So yeah, we're excited about the work on the horizon. We, as Emma also spoke to earlier, have had 2 fellows speak before committees. So Dems really get their feet dirty and get sort of up in the face of legislators on a pretty regular basis, albeit over Zoom, to make the case for different bills that happen to tickle their fancy. So this past week, it was ban the box legislation, which as sort of the acronym or moniker or whatever alludes to here, would ban colleges in the state from asking about an applicant's criminal history. So particularly for state institutions that might attract formerly incarcerated persons who are eager to improve their educational prospects, that's a real hindrance, whether psychologically or also in the admissions room. And then before that, we had another fellow of ours testify on behalf of a bill that would have required state institutions in Connecticut to study and report on habits of hunger on their campuses. A study in 2019 found that 31% of college students in Connecticut, not at Yale, thankfully, but in the state at large, go hungry on any given week, which is a crazy number to think about, especially in a state that is as well-resourced and as educationally sure as Connecticut. So really important work coming up this session that we feel really privileged to be a part of and have our partners in the CGA to thank for that work.
Thank you so much, Kyle. That was wonderful in so many ways. You touched upon everything. Thank you so much. And also, I kind of, love to bring you on as like an additional board or panelist here. Can you just give a quick introduction of yourself for those watching?
Totally can. Sorry to crash the party, everyone. My name is Kyle. I am a member of the class of 2023. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am in Pearson College, go Knights. You might know that there's a different mascot. They seem to change every year these days. I currently serve as president of Yale Dems, although in years past, I have been our legislative coordinator, our speakers and engagements coordinator, and many, many moons ago, an elections fellow and a legislative fellow. So very much, gung-ho Dems, love this place. And Roxana, you've assembled a really wonderful group of panelists here. Cannot imagine a better group of kids to be representing the organization that we all love so dearly.
Thank you so much. And Sergio, could you tell us a little bit, please, about the current state of the Dems legislation when you were a part of Dems, or do you remember any like big monumental wins or bills that required a very high lift when you were going through?
Yeah, I remember we worked closely with I believe at the time Representative and I think now Senator May Flexer on some sexual assault survivors' rights legislation. That was something that I worked particularly closely on, but we had a number of things, obviously very different political contexts at the same time, pre-Trump, than some of the more recent experiences, I think.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's interesting to see kind of how the political climate differs depending on the years and how the larger like nationwide political climate is reflected and kind of trickled down into what even Dems fellows as students are dealing with. So thank you. And then moving on to elections, Alvaro, what sorts of campaigns or elections-oriented groups can the elections fellows get involved with, and what is the sort of work that an elections fellow would do?
Yes, so there's, in a way, in elections, there's 2 types of different types of work you can get, not types of work, types of campaigns you can get involved in. One is the very traditional political campaign that involves races for state house, state senate, local mayoral races, local commissioner races, this congressional races. We work in the most competitive races across the country. So this past semester in 2021, we were working a lot of Virginia races. We were working in Danbury and Connecticut. And every semester, I mean, now Dems is working towards the midterms. So we're working the most competitive congressional races coming up in the upcoming midterms. And for that type of work you can do, there's essentially 3 buckets of work usually in campaigns. Field work, which deals with everything with outreach of voters. It deals with making sure you get volunteers motivated and making sure they help support the campaign. There's communications work, which is along the lines of interactions with the press, working on social media, working on the messaging of any political campaign. And then there's also finance work and just making sure to constantly be raising money for donors and making sure the campaign is well funded, which probably is what a lot of the fellows are working on right now, given that we're in a spring semester, and then in the fall, a lot of it will probably transition to outreach to voters. And that's probably one bucket of work, which has been a long time in Dems. That's probably one of the core parts of Dems. And the other type of work you can do, which is something new that I started last year, was working with grassroots organizations. And these are organizations like we work with New Georgia Project, we work with Texas Organizing Project, we work with Florida Rising, and these grassroots organizations work in mobilizing Black and brown communities who are typically maybe marginalized, and uplift them, especially if they've never voted before or may not have never voted before, not sure what to do or how to engage properly, and maybe aren't civically motivated. And the reason we focus on this is, I think, especially after the Georgia election in 2020, there was a lot of emphasis on the work that went into flipping Georgia blue, particularly with New Georgia Project, with Fair Fight. And we saw the power of those organizations they had to swing elections and reaching voters who typically aren't being reached out to, because typically campaigns, they reach out to voters who constantly show up to vote. And these grassroots organizations tend to reach out to voters who may have not been engaged in the political process and really try to get them involved. So that's something new that Dems has also started to engage with. And of course, 3 highly competitive states, Florida, Texas, and Georgia. And that has been really gratifying for a lot of fellows to work on. And it's they've also been able to get a variety of work. They also engage in a similar type of campaign work of outreach to voters. They do communications work, social media work, but they also get a lot of different really neat tasks. Like for instance, leading up to election time, they were doing research on different bands to perform at the polls to get people to come out to the polls. And so they do really unique stuff like that as well, and unique initiatives throughout the time. That's been a really excellent addition to the elections branch that we started just last year and is continuing as well.
Thank you so much. And can you tell us a little bit about how the timing, whether we're in an even or an odd year, how does that affect the electoral work that the fellows do?
Right. I think a lot of the electoral work is probably consistent throughout. Like I said, it's probably going to be in one of those 3 buckets of field, finance, or communications, regardless of what election year. It's going to depend, obviously, if it's an even or odd year, what elections we're working on. So on odd years, like in 2019, 2021, we work a lot on local races that are across the country. A lot of local races do happen in odd years. So that means mayoral races, city commission races, school board races. Those races are all happening a lot in 2021 for your city commissioners and things along those lines. And that's something we often ignore, but it's a super important part of our electoral process. So those are some of the races we focus on. And then there are some states that do have their elections on off years, so-called. That includes Virginia. That's probably the biggest state that has a big governor's race, state house, state senate races going on these off years. But there's also other states, New Jersey notably also has elections during that time period. And we try to engage in those races because they are important. And oftentimes, especially what we've seen in the past 2 years, state legislators get a lot of things done, and they often are some of the most impactful bodies of governing bodies that can implement so many different policies. So it's absolutely essential that we engage with them. And then on even years, that tends to be where obviously there's a lot of momentum and a lot of news covering the midterm election or the presidential election. So in 2020, it was obviously a lot of work looking towards Congress, looking towards the presidency, governor's races, Senate races, all the different races that you can possibly imagine during those on years. And then of course in 2022, also working on congressional elections. And right now Dems is doing that as well. The work tends to be consistent across all campaigns. Obviously, some campaigns tend to have more funding, tend to be wider scaled, but they tend to be the same skills. And if anything, there's a lot you can learn from a smaller campaign than a bigger campaign. Bigger campaigns tend to have a lot more people to do a lot more tasks, and in smaller campaigns, the nice thing is you can get a little bit exposure to everything, as opposed to some bigger campaigns where they may only need help with phone calls or they may only need help with something specific. So there's different things to go around on even years, but the work tends to stay consistent. Just of course on the issues, the elections you're working on, and probably the work you may be doing in some cases.
Yeah, thank you. And then, so we have elections fellows working for campaigns all across the US. What sort of research goes into selecting those campaigns and ensuring that the students learn not just about the campaign as if it were insular, but about the community and exactly, like what goes on in the current area, like whether we're in Nevada and Virginia or, just a few hours away in Connecticut?
Right. So we have quite a thorough process in selecting campaigns. First and foremost, we try to make sure, of course, in any race that we pick, that it is competitive. That's something that we're looking at. So, for instance, Rosa DeLauro is the congresswoman here in New Haven. She's great, but the race is quite not competitive, and she's going to win re-election. So that isn't a race we would probably spend our efforts working on. So we tend to work virtually in some of the most competitive elections across the country. So first, we work in identifying which are those elections that are highly competitive, that are going to be make or break by just a couple, it could be 100 votes, 1,000 votes, it doesn't have to be much. And we work on identifying those races. This year was actually quite difficult because when selecting these races, right now there's a lot of redistricting going on, and that there was some sort of a prediction game going on just because the timing is off in some states, but trying to see which state, which representatives or which are going to be in competitive districts or going to be more competitive or are going to be more safe. So we can keep that in mind. And then another thing we keep in mind in making sure, so we don't choose candidates based on necessarily if they're incredibly left or moderate left. We try to get a widespread of array, but we do want to be clear with members about what type of races they're getting involved in. So regardless if they're supporting a progressive candidate or a more moderate candidate, the important part is just making sure that members are informed about what decision and what type of candidate they're working with, so they can make that decision on their own. And then when it comes to some of the things that we also look for in candidates, we also just make sure that they're responsive. Some campaigns are incredibly busy, and we want to make sure that fellows have a good experience. And we also try to make sure that generally there is no scandals on many of these candidates. So a Como probably will not, we would not be supporting something like that with sexual assaults or anything along those lines. We try to stay away from candidates like that. And we also try to have a general set of principles we try to follow when it comes to supporting candidates. So for instance, reproductive justice, that is a very important issue. And if there's a candidate who may not support reproductive justice, we may choose not to work with that candidate. But we try not to discriminate between how progressive or not progressive they are. So for instance, on healthcare, really, of course, there's some people who are for Medicare for all, some people who may, Democrats who are not, but we generally are looking for candidates who fit the policy of the left-leaning Democratic Party. And again, and just inform members on what their policy stance is. So there's a lot of little aspects that go into it. And there's a lot of also just little more details, but that's generally the framework of how, what goes into choosing a candidate.
Thank you so much for the in-depth, very detailed analysis of the elections branch. Thank you, Alvaro. Turning to the voter engagement branch.
And
how
sorry,
does it-
Ratina, can I just jump in quickly?
Yeah, of course, of course.
But just because I've been in the unique experience probably among people here of being on the other side and having Yale Dems play a role in getting me elected, and just so grateful for that. So I just wanted to share some of what that was like, if that's okay. So we had the election fellows program really took off after my time, but staying involved and being part of Yale Dems alumni, I was aware of it, and so I reached out early on. I launched my campaign, as I said, almost 2 years before the election date, which was just completely unprecedented for a small town like mine. And I did that in part because I knew I had this secret weapon of potential Yale Dems fellows who, based off their interests in a smaller race, could really, with enough time, build up the infrastructure and make a huge difference. So we had fellows primarily in two areas, one of them being policy. And so went around and kind of gauged what people's interests were. And as an example of the impact that Yale Dems members had, we had one fellow who was really passionate about the environment and wanted to work on local environmental policy. And I think what's valuable there is that even if you have some national perspective, seeing the local implementation just gives you deeper insight into how that plays out on the ground. And actually, just this morning, we had a very early morning council meeting for a long number of hours, and I was able to get unanimous approval for a climate action plan that is building off the policy that those Yale Dem fellows helped write. The other aspect was in data, and this might be a little bit unique for my campaign. I was trying to think outside the box, but we had just this brilliant statistics major who was a STEM major otherwise, and had a computer science background, which just speaks to the diversity that you get in Dems and at Yale. It's very interdisciplinary, something I wanted to draw on. And so what he did was essentially from scratch create this whole data infrastructure that allowed us to get totally micro targeted, where we could look at what's the top issue for woman over 30 under the age of 40, in this precinct, and really, we had dozens and dozens of different mailings, and that fellow helped organize all that and to really break down the electorate into all these different slices, making sure that what they're getting was a consistent message in terms of values, but that they're hearing the issues that they cared about. Just some incredible, that literally in the Bay Area had never been done at the local level before. That was only possible because of Yale Dems fellows. So really the chance to the opportunity to make an impact is real, and not just in winning what was a competitive race for me, but also in actually implementing the policy still today, years later. So definitely Yale Dems fellows had a huge role to play in that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, and of course, congratulations on winning, and thanks to the wider Dems network for making that possible. And we do want to touch upon the last branch, which is voter engagement. And Alana, we'd love if you could speak a little bit about how the VE voter engagement branch is trying to improve student access to voting and what student access to voting at Yale currently looks like.
Sorry, I'm struggling to unmute, but so I since I haven't been a voter engagement fellow myself, my experience with voter engagement really is from the role that they play in Dems meetings and in organizing on campus. So at meetings, voter engagement fellows present on their research on voting rights and how that impacts our experience as students. They write to professors about voting accessibility on campus and disseminate registration and election information. My first year, I remember the voter engagement branch organizing outside dining halls, talking to folks about voting, talking to students as they walked by to see if they had a voting plan and to help them kind of understand the intricacies of voting and the barriers that are there. So one of the biggest projects is working to establish Election Day as a university-wide holiday. Right now, it is not. I remember this past election day in New Haven. I think I had 3 or 4 classes that day. And it was really, it was really a struggle to get out and vote. And so a lot of students end up not voting. So, there's really a push to make it a university-wide holiday, and there's a lot of pushback from higher leadership at Yale surrounding that. And additionally, formalizing an absentee ballot mail system is kind of one of the things that they've been thinking about, incorporating registration into the first year experience. So making sure as many people as possible are registered. Voter engagement has done tabling around campus, encouraging folks to register to vote. And then also kind of establishing civic engagement more generally on campus. So there's really a lot that the voter engagement branch does, and it's fun to have a branch that's more centered on kind of campus life, because we're all experiencing it. And even like as a political science major, like in a lot of political spaces, like I understand the barriers that there are to vote, right? Like my ballot, and I'm originally from New Hampshire, was thrown out because of like an error with the absentee ballots in my district. So there are certainly kind of efforts, or there are certainly barriers to voting, and the voter engagement branch aims to address that starting on campus and beyond.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Alana, we'd love if you could talk us a little bit more about the New Haven ward system and the alders and Ward 1 alder, and how that relationship is with the Dems and with Yale.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to talk a little bit about what the alder system looks like, there are 30 alders in New Haven. So New Haven is broken up into wards, and each ward has an alder. And each alder represents a really small constituency of voters or of folks in that district. So it's actually around 4,000 voters each. And there are 2 wards in New Haven that are majority Yale students. Overwhelmingly so is Ward 1, which is kind of sometimes called the Yale alder. Ward 1 contains 8 out of the 14 residential colleges, and then Ward 22 contains the remaining residential colleges, and also covers part of residents of Dixwell, a neighborhood kind of neighboring the other residential colleges in Ward 22. And in Ward 22, the alder is Jeanette Morrison, who is a former social worker, and isn't obviously is not a Yale student. But Ward 1 has a precedent of Yale students running for alder. So there are a few things that make this kind of like complex, in that one, it has a turnover rate that is much higher than other members of the Board of Alders. So by nature of it being students, and a lot of students electing someone, you have a greater advantage of winning if you are a student that people know. And so once you graduate, especially since prior to the past few terms, the past few alders rather, many students had no connection to New Haven, were coming in, being the Ward 1 alder for a term or 2, and then leaving and never returning. So there's more of a turnover rate in that sense. There's also a little bit of a difference between the Ward 1 alder's role and the rest of the 29 alders' roles. So alders are local legislators and representatives, but in addition to that, they address the daily concerns of their constituents. This includes things like potholes, addressing like infrastructure, trash pickup, things like that. And Yale's campus is really, really well maintained by Yale. And so the Ward 1 alder actually doesn't really have those roles to take on. Their primary role then becomes being a legislator, being a representative. And so, the Ward 1 alder kind of has a little bit more opportunity to focus more on legislation. And so when you think about that in context with like the high turnover and a lot of folks not being from the community and then immediately leaving after, there are certainly some problems with that. That said, the past three alders who have served in Ward 1 have been people who grew up in New Haven. Alex Guznag, a friend of mine, and also has been involved in Dems, is currently the Ward 1 alder. He grew up in Fairhaven, a neighborhood in New Haven. And so that's kind of something to think about. Additionally, Yale students take up roughly 7% of the New Haven population. But the Board of Alders has quite a bit more than 7% connection, like Yale connections or Yale affiliations. So a lot of people on the Board of Alders have, or not a lot, but disproportionately, a lot of people on the Board of Alders have graduated from Yale or have maybe a child who's attending Yale, have some connection there. And so when you're thinking about the representation in the city of those 30 wards, and only 7% of those being Yale students, having one alder in addition to a lot of Yale affiliation on the New Haven Board of Alders becomes really a significant influence. So that's a little bit about the Board of Alders and how the Ward 1 alder interacts with that. And additionally, the Ward 1 alder has also prior to, or actually not prior to these past three alders, usually has some affiliation with Yale Dem. So that's just another thing to note.
Yes, thank you so much, Alana. That's perfect. Thank you, thank you. Anne, you had a few questions.
Yeah, thank you. Great session. I have two questions. One is, and I'll be happy to take this offline if it makes sense to explore further, but I just wanted to understand a little bit more clearly how fellows are matched with candidates, because, and you'll have to tell me how you pronounced your name again. Is it Alvaro or Alvaro?
Alvaro is good.
Alvaro, okay. I think you used the word competitive, and to cut to the chase, I'm thinking about the gubernatorial election in the state of Iowa, which by many standards wouldn't be considered competitive per se. We've got a Republican incumbent who's going to be giving the address after the State of the Union speech next week, running against a Black woman who very close came to becoming Secretary of State. And I'm just curious if there might be an opportunity there and if there's still time to do that. So I'm happy to take that in line if there's still a possibility.
Right. So just to explain how the fellow process works, in the beginning of the semester, we provide, out of all the campaigns to respond to us, we probably reach out to, first off, like tons and tons of campaigns, and only if we get back to us. Once that process happens, what we do is we provide those options to members of the Yale College Democrats, and they basically select what campaigns they're interested in working on, and we match them based off why they're interested in the race, and also simply why, what type of work they may be looking for. This is a very I think Emma said this earlier, this is like a very non-competitive process. It's not like we're trying to rat someone out or trying to make this a competitive process where we're cutting people here and there. Everyone gets matched to a campaign, and a campaign that's best fit for them. And also there have been many instances where there have been fellows who come from a specific state or come from a specific area, and if they're passionate about a specific campaign, or if they have a campaign in their hometown that they want to work on, we do everything we can to support them in that effort. And we had that instance last semester. And when it comes to the specific work for this upcoming semester, I know electoral work has already gotten underway, but I'm happy to speak more about and connect you to the current elections coordinator if there's some sort of work that you want help with.
I'd like to explore that. I'll put my my email in the chat. And then the other question is, last year I live I'm in my hometown, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, about 150,000. And I was very involved in a mayoral campaign, which is a nonpartisan position. But when you look at the candidates, I mean, it's kind of clear where people are leaning based on the policies that they favor. And it was my first involvement at that. I mean, I vote regularly, but it was my first involvement in a campaign. And so when you talk about fundraising and communications and so forth, you mentioned earlier partnering with grassroots organization. So my candidate and the other candidate, my candidate raised 180,000, the other candidate raised 200,000, and then there was a runoff for the two of them. And I think for a mayoral election in a town our size, that's a lot of money. And what what was interesting for me is it takes a lot of time and energy to door knock, phone bank, host meet and greets, and raise money. And then there's the challenge of, so much percentage of it came from out of state, or, and so we were sensitive to what the average dollar amount was and how much of it was in state versus out of state. And then we were also concerned, or very concerned, and this is where the grassroots piece comes in. I'm part of a young meaning new social justice entity, and we're a 501c3. And two of the officers of the organization were running for municipal elections. And so there was a lot of sensitivity to, we can help get out the vote, but we need to be really careful because we're going to be subject to credit. I mean, there were interesting protests that took place back in 2020, as did many other places. And so I guess my question really is just any insights about, it almost felt like, to me, as much, it was a priority to, as much as I understood, it was a priority to raise money. You have to, and knock doors and so forth. We weren't as effective as I would have hoped in reaching, quote unquote, underrepresented groups or disinvested groups. And that also takes time and energy, and breaking through barriers, decades of discrimination and cynicism and so forth. And it just felt like, okay, am I focusing more on this? And then I know it's not binary, but it felt like it was either or. So I'm just curious if what you've learned or experienced or could pass on in that regard.
Right. I have many thoughts on this. So I guess to start on the fundraising point, this is something I probably sympathize with candidates a lot with. One thing people don't know is candidates probably spend up to maybe 40 to 60% of their time just trying to raise money during campaigns. And it's just a crucial part of any campaigns. I personally think we should be trying to get money out of politics, and we should be reforming our politics to do that. But until that happens, it's very hard to run a campaign, without a PAC if the other side is going to be doing that as well. And that's something I, in a way, sympathize with candidates, because the instance of the Obama, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the John Ossoff, that happens a small fraction of the time compared to how many local candidates are running across the country, how many people are running all over the place. And I, in a way, sympathize for candidates, knowing that I speak into candidates and some of them don't like raising money. They don't like asking for it. It's a very, grueling process of having to spend, 50% of your day calling donors, asking them for a donation, calling every single person on your contacts, and then trying to get connected, hosting fundraisers. There's a lot of effort that goes into this. And I guess I would hope to see a policy change at some points, because I don't like the process and how it is right now. I think there's too much money in politics. But at the moment, that's just how the process works. And I do sympathize for candidates who may have to start a PAC, just because I know how difficult it can be sometimes to raise money. And when it comes to the point of reaching out Black and brown voters and voters who may not vote as often, it's a tricky also issue. I think some campaigns have definitely tried to make more of an effort to reach out to those communities. Usually the traditional campaign structure is to reach out to voters who have voted already in previous elections. So for instance, for this 2022 election, a strategy may be, okay, let's make sure to reach out to everyone who voted in the 2018 election, because you know that they'll vote again, probably likely in 2022. And you use those data instead of 2020, because obviously there's so many other voters who turn out in 2020 that may not vote in a midterm election. And that's why you may use the 2018 data as opposed to the 2020 data. And again, typically campaigns, the traditional campaign styles, to reach out to voters who you know are going to turn out to vote. And that is absolutely crucial. I don't think that should necessarily change, but I don't think it should be necessarily an either or thing. Obviously, you want to reach out to voters who may not have never voted, and more campaigns you're starting to see are starting to try to move and engaging voters who may not be as consistent in voting. And that's also why grassroots organizations play such an essential role in this aspect, because they're able to do this. And I guess the struggle with campaigns is you have a limited amount of funds, and it may cost about $10 to reach every voter if you're sending every voter a mailer, if you're sending every voter a literature, if you're sending every voter if you're in volunteers. Those all cost money to reach to each and every voter. So it's the issue of whether you spread yourself thin and not reach maybe reach every voter once, as opposed to hitting one voter 3 times to make sure they turn out to vote. So I guess that's it, and maybe not an answer to your question, but at least an explanation of the logic that may go behind campaign strategy and targeting.
Well,
Thank you,
It's very
Alvaro.
consistent with what we wrestled with.
Yes, thank you. Wonderful questions. Really quickly, though, I would love it if Emma could spend maybe 1 minute just talking about the community of Dems and like the social aspect, and just what events are there for Dems members or for alums.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, as we speak right now, various members of our board are delivering goodie bags to all of our first year's dorms right now. Yep, Kyle has a picture of that. We function very much on like a mentorship system here. So we form what's called a Dems family, where there are upperclassmen and underclassmen who join together throughout the semester and are there to support each other. So that's kind of the process that we're going through right now. And we'll have a little party to celebrate that tomorrow. I think like every campus organization, we've really been grappling with what the COVID-19 pandemic meant for community building over the last 2 years. It's been really, really difficult. I think especially because we had 2 brand new classes of Yaleys come in who had not been on campus and didn't, have person-to-person exposure to what it meant to be. I think what surprised me most about coming to Yale is how much my clubs and organizations played into my social life and how much time I would spend with my peers who were also, working on these amazing things with me in a club like Dems. So I think, we're kind of really trying to make up ground here as restrictions ease, in order to like make Dems the space that it was when, Kyle, Alvaro, Alana, and I were first years. And we were able to, really, dive headfirst into a pretty amazing community on this campus.
Yes, thank you. JC, did you have something to say, or should we wrap this up?
Just really quickly again, to thank everyone. I know we try to stop at 9 o'clock, but I was just curious for a quick answer to this question that occurred to me, because Ann Carter is from Iowa, and then we're talking about supporting candidates. I don't know too many people in Iowa, I must admit, but the one of the persons I know happens to be running for Secretary of Agriculture, and he's a Yale alum. And I just was wondering, like, is that the kind of candidate you would seek out, or Secretary of Agriculture of Iowa, or are you looking for, other types of candidates? And I just think it speaks, it's interesting how small the world is, right? I don't know that many people in Iowa, but here we are tonight talking about Iowa and Dems, and they come together. So it speaks larger to the whole idea that the Alumni Association is really complex and overlaps, and we encourage you to be a part of the Alumni Association when you graduate. But if someone could just enlighten me as to, like, how do you seek a Yale alum to maybe support in their candidacy?
Right. I mean, we support all types of races, so there's not any specific type of race we don't tend to support. It really depends on whether we get a response from the campaign, whether they provide certain type of work that would be good for a fellow, and whether they're a good match for the Yale College Democrats. But there isn't necessarily a specific type of race we're looking for. We're really open to any type of races. I will say right now the Yale College Democrats has already gotten underway when it comes to working with some specific candidates. So I'm not sure how much work they would be able to provide this upcoming semester, but what I could do is put you in contact to the current elections coordinator in case of any future type of involvement. And we also, we tend to focus on a couple of races for fellows program, but there's always the opportunity to host some outside events with different campaigns. And alongside, but one thing to do note about the Yale College Democrats is we don't endorse in a primary. So if there is a type of situation where there's two Democrats running in the same race, we won't tend to get involved until that primary is over. But if you want, I can connect you to the current elections coordinator to speak more about that. Again, I'm not sure how much can be done this semester because I know the process is underway, but definitely I'm sure he's happy to chat about future involvements.
And thank you, Sergio, for putting that information. Yes, I am speaking of John Norwood, if anyone is in the chat. I think before we end, it would be nice if Jeff Feldman, who's our co-chair of this committee, could speak on behalf of the Thursday night program in general and promote maybe next week's program. Jeff?
Great. JC, thank you. Roxana and all the guests here, thank you so much for participating. I personally, I didn't know any of this was going on. So I tell you, every Thursday night, you just get a nugget or two, and this was really fascinating. It's great to see all the young Yale people doing so much on this platform. As we said, we do this every Thursday. I encourage you to come join us wherever you can. These are the upcoming shows, as we call for next week and the few weeks after. It's going to be really exciting. On the third, I think there's a special networking event that may be for GSA students. Maybe Steve or someone else will chime in. But in general, you show up 8 o'clock Thursdays and you know where to be. So we're looking forward to it. Thanks for participating tonight. And we'll hope to see you soon.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Emma, Lana, Alvaro, and Sergio. Thank you.